Welcome, fellow explorers. My name is Professor Jonathan Peter Atwood, and I will be your guide to all of these great journeys that we're going to go on together. And I thought maybe I'd start this first episode, tell you a little bit about myself, and give you kind of a tour of my lab. So I thought that'd be kind of like a good introduction to where we're going to go and what you can expect. I've been a scientist and explorer for many, many years. I really don't want to tell you my age. That's that kind of thing where people don't like to tell their age. So I have 4 PhDs. I could say astrophysics. Mechanical engineering. All the chemistry, all those things, nuclear physics. But here's the thing. I have 4 PhDs, but I have 6 PhDs, which is actually the level higher than a PhD. Not a lot of people can get them. It's kind of like an invite-only kind of thing, and those are in, some fields that you may not have even heard of, like astrochemistry and, I don't want to confuse you from the get-go, but, mechanical metaphysics, like things like that. They're just not really accepted disciplines yet. I think we'll get there at some point, but I don't necessarily think we're there yet. So, but that's okay. Science, goes on its own timeline to the beat of its own drum. So I don't think there's necessarily, science is never really a race. Science really is about the discovery more than the actual race. I've been a scientist for a while. I've spoken at a lot of conventions. I've been called an absent-minded professor. Sometimes I forget things. Sometimes I stutter. I don't really like the term absent-minded professor. I'm more like a scientist who doesn't always remember everything. I think that might be a little more accurate than absent-minded professor. But I don't think that will really impact kind of what we're doing and where we're going. I remember most of the important things. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. We'll get there together, and maybe a couple of details might be a little contradictory, but I don't really think that matters when you look at the journey as a whole and where we're going to be going. But a lot of people ask too, well, Jonathan, and then I say Professor Atwood if I don't know them, and they say, Professor Atwood, how are science and exploration related? And, I kind of take a deep breath and sometimes give a very long-winded explanation, but I don't think that's really necessary here. I mean, if you're here, you're listening to the show, I think you already kind of know in your brain and in your heart how much they are actually related, because science, of course, the most obvious thing is the discovery, and when you explore, you're discovering new things. So that on the surface, it seems like they're pretty close anyway, but it gets even more interesting as you dive a little bit deeper. When you're doing an experiment, when you're exploring, what you're doing, it's almost like an artist. You're starting with a blank canvas. That canvas could be the rainforest or a theorem about how time-space is related to geothermal energy. Things like that, where they're almost like a blank canvas, but also a puzzle to be solved, a nut to be cracked, all of those things together. When you start breaking down the elements and learn how, the core of the Earth and, geothermal science, when you get closer to the Earth's core, things actually cool down. I mean, that's, Jules Verne figured that out when he wrote about a bunch of dinosaurs in the center of the Earth. I mean, he didn't get it completely right, don't get me wrong, but, he was closer than he got credit for sure. And I have to say, I admire Jules Verne very, very much. He was a very insightful guy. He was a born storyteller, and but he knew his science. That's for sure. And I think right now he'd probably be looking down from heaven, thinking wow, I created steampunk, wearing that cool set of goggles and with an ascot and on his flying steamship. And I think he'd be really excited about the science and the exploring that he was basically the father of. So when you look at science and exploring together, there really are a match made in heaven. And, the further science progresses, the actually more we can explore, the further we can go, the closer we can get to finding the answers that we've been seeking, since we made fire. and yelled at the monolith many, many years ago. I think there's just a lot of ground to cover, and there's a lot of things that science can help with, and there's a lot of places we can go as explorers. And I think if you combine the science and the exploration, I think we can really go to places that we've only ever dreamed of in the past. I think we can reach the heights of humanity. When I say, humanity, I feel like it's even bigger than humanity. Whatever the word is after humanity, that's actually where, we want to head. Uber meta humanity, maybe something, interesting, something that's better than ourselves, that we strive to keep getting better and better until we've explored and gotten the answers that we seek, and ultimately achieved peace and calm, which I think with science and exploring, there's granted, it hasn't always been used that way. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying when used properly, science and exploring can really bring us to that inner peace and that kind of place we always look for and want in our own lives. We're all scientists and explorers in our own way. I just happen to be an actual scientist and explorer, but you are too in your own way. And I think we all have that in us, that desire for to explore, to seek out the unknown, to learn something that we hadn't known before, and to understand something that hasn't been understood before. And I think those are the things that we could really have in common as we continue this journey. I'm going to take you through a tour of the lab, kind of the different places that we have, some of the experiments that I'm working on, some of the tools. And I mentioned in the, I guess they call it the trailer teaser. I've been working on some vehicles, which I think is really fun because those vehicles will actually be what takes us on these journeys together. And one of the things that's always fascinated me is fuel types with experimental prototype vehicles. And, you just don't know, what the next big thing is going to be. Basically, you've got 8 alternative fuels, if we're looking to kind of get off of fossil fuel, which we should. But there's other things that we can look at. Like there's things like ethanol, of course, that's the alcohol-based alternative fuel made from crops, corn, barley, wheat, broccoli, but people don't really know that because it's a little more expensive, but it does work with broccoli. The thing is that there's always a positive and a negative. With ethanol, it's renewable, but the subsidies may have a negative impact on, we're not really sure. But anyway, we also have natural gas that is an alternative fuel that burns and clean, and it's widely available, but it has fewer harmful emissions, which is great, but it can create methane, a greenhouse gas that's even worse than CO2. So electricity, this is where we're looking at some really viable alternative fuels. Now, again, these are good for cars, but when I'm working on my experimental prototype vehicles, they're not always cars. So some of these fuels don't necessarily apply to what I'll be doing, but it's hard to get a submarine to run just on electricity. It just is. I mean, I'm not saying that to be defeatist. I'm just saying it's very difficult to have an entire submarine run on just electricity. We're not quite there yet. But electricity is highly efficient, and we already have an electricity network, which is great. We have fuel cells, but much electricity is still, unfortunately, created from coal or natural gas, which can leave, of course, a bad carbon footprint. But, there's ways to change that, and we're working on those as well. I'm working on some of them right in the lab right now. There's hydrogen that can be mixed with natural gas to create an alternative fuel for vehicles that use certain types of internal combustion engines. Now, it is expensive, though. That's one of the bad things. Propane. I'm not a big fan of propane. I mean, even, when I go to barbecues, you can always, they say you can't taste it in the burgers. You kind of can. It's interesting as being a scientist, my taste buds are always a little bit more sensitive to different things in my food and in my drink. So I can definitely tell when I'm over for a barbecue if they have a gas grill or not, for sure. Not that charcoal's, much better, surely. But, there are fewer emissions, but it also creates the propane. Now, biodiesel is an interesting one. That's an alternative fuel based on vegetable oils or animal fats, even those that are recycled after restaurants. Like, all that, the fat that they throw away, you could actually fuel a car with it. I got to specify here, a car. not a submarine or a rocket. So it's not entirely useful to me. So methanol is another one, which is known as wood alcohol. It can be used in alternative fuel and flexible fuel vehicles. One of the problems is nobody's making them, so there's no real infrastructure for things to run on methanol. And there's P-series fuels. They're a blend of a lot of the things that we had already just kind of talked about. So, that's one of the things that's interesting is like if you can kind of create a mixes of these, maybe you could get some kind of mix that can work pretty well and be very effective. I'm going to tell you guys what I've been working on. I've been working on what I call the air engine. So what it does is it breaks down the O2 molecules that surround the engine that, are everywhere, just in the oxygen, and harnesses the energy hiding in between. So in my vehicles, there's vents on the sides that just simply take in oxygen. Now, granted, it doesn't work in space. That's one thing that, the rocket, obviously there's no oxygen in space, but it does work underwater, because I have a filtration system that acts like gills in the on the sides of the submarine. So what it does is then it can break down the energy in between the two O2 molecules. I know this is a little technical and confusing, and like I said, sometimes I get some of the stuff a little off, but I'm sure this is the first episode. You guys can forgive me if I do a slip here and there, but basically the point I'm trying to make is the air engine. The air engine is really what I think is the future of any kind of transportation. So now that I've kind of talked to you about like just the fuel, I want to talk to you about some of the vehicles that I'll actually be working with. Now, obviously I have a car. I do live in Los Angeles, so everybody has to need a car, even scientists, explorers especially. But if you have a giant RV, you can't really drive that to Trader Joe's. You just can't. It's not practical, and you can't park it anywhere. So I do have a regular car. I think it's a, I'm not really good with names. It's a Priola or something. I'm not sure. But anyway, it's very fuel efficient. I haven't really had the time to actually convert it to my air engine yet. So I've just kind of used what conventionally is on the market right now. It runs on a mixture of electricity and hope. So I think those two things together, it's a good marketing ploy for sure. And but it seems to work. So I haven't done any alterations to it yet. I just haven't had time. I've been too busy exploring and working on more important experiments for sure. I do have a submarine, like I'd mentioned before, that took a while to put together, but it has been fitted with the air engine, with the gill intake valve subroutines. So I think it's a really effective submarine. It's a comfortable submarine. A lot of times you think submarines, it's cramped, it's small, it's claustrophobic. I actually, when I built the submarine, I wanted to make it a little roomier. So it's actually a little more comfortable. Like you could stretch your legs out. You actually have a lot more room in the submarine than you would actually think. So it's a very comfortable submarine. It seats 4. I really wrestled with that, going back and forth, like, well, do I really need 4 seats? It's a long journey. Then I have to put 4 beds in there and at least 2 bathrooms, a full galley, and then plus, there needs to be a recreation room if you're going to have that many people there, and then an exercise room. It got a little out of hand, I'll admit that, but it is a very comfortable submarine. And I think if you're ever with me in the submarine, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised about how comfortable it is. And sometimes you may even forget that you're in a submarine. You may think, oh, this is like a really comfortable underwater RV. So, I don't know, or maybe even an underwater cruise ship without the slides. So I don't know. But anyway, it's a comfortable submarine. I don't know if I'll ever, need all 4 seats, but they're there in case, you never know. You could run into a friend on a journey and they may not have a ride home. So even if you're underwater, you don't want to be that guy who goes, oh yeah, sorry, I only have 1 seat in my submarine. I'm going to have to go back on my own. You'll have to, call whatever the underwater company is that gives rides. I don't know. So I think that's a really important thing to, just plan. And this goes back to being a scientist and explorer. You have to plan. You have to plan in advance. You have to plan for contingencies. You have to plan for things you would not expect, because they happen. They happen in science and they happen in exploring. If you're exploring a cloud city and you don't bring any fruit with you, ground fruit, that how are you going to make an offering to their sky god? You can't. You have to be ready for these things. And that is one of the things that I will be talking to you about. Is one of my prototype vehicles is a jet that went higher in the clouds, but not so high as into space, just in the clouds. And we actually found a city in the clouds that we explored, and that'll be one of the journeys. One of the things that I do want to talk to you about too is the actual, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit, but the journeys that we'll actually be going on, because you're probably wondering, well, this, your lab's great and what you're working on is great, and your forward-thinking, fuel systems are fantastic, but where are we going to be going? Where are we going to be going in these journeys? And that's a great question. So I'm just going to kind of give you a little taste of some of the places that we'll be going. And one of them is that I took a ride on the Orient Express to a science conference. Now, you may think that, but the Orient Express ended service years ago. Again, it's kind of... It did, but invitation only. They do let people in for science conventions and other things. They do still run. I've talked a lot about the submarine. Of course, I've been underwater, and did I find Atlantis? Well, I don't know if it was Atlantis, but there were a lot of really nice people living there, and then I'll be talking about when we met them and basically their culture, their underwater culture, which was absolutely fascinating. Sometimes we'll go back to the lab, and I'll tell you about what else I've been working on. We do have this initial visit and this initial tour. I'm kind of taking you to the basic broad strokes of the lab. There is I have a Site B, a Lab B, that I don't kind of really talk about it. I don't let visitors in, but for you guys, at some point we'll visit Lab B for sure, and I'll let you know what's going on there. I've also been to Alaska and at the Tongass National Forest, which is the fourth biggest forest. It's over 26,000 square miles in total area, which, the fourth biggest forest. There's a lot in there. There's a lot to see, and there's a lot of things that people haven't seen. So it was a pretty amazing hiking trip. Sometimes it's good just to leave the prototype vehicles behind, or just use them to get to your destination and then take the rest of it on foot. I mean, that's what's pretty exciting. I do that a bunch of times too. I may not be in the vehicle the whole time. I might actually just take that to a destination, and then the real journey begins. But again, it's like science and exploring. You just don't know. You don't know what's going to happen, or you don't know what you're going to need. So every vehicle that I travel in, I always have at least 4 weeks of a food and water supply, just to, for any kind of contingency. And granted, a lot of these visits are only a couple of days, but no one gets criticized, rightfully so, for being too prepared. I mean, I really think, preparedness, that was the old Boy Scout motto, be prepared. I think it holds true not for just Boy Scouts, but for adventurers, explorers, and anyone, really. I think it's an important thing. Let's talk about some other things here, some other places that we're going to go. I actually found, this was absolutely fascinating, I found the most secluded beach in the world, which it was, by accident, really, and I'll get into that in the episode, but it's interesting that if you find the most secluded beach in the world, even the wildlife don't know that it's there, so even they get surprised when they find it. It was really interesting to see. I've never seen so much surprised wildlife in my life. There were everything from seals to confused seagulls, who didn't really know what had happened, but then they found this beach that was on the border of it was absolutely fantastic. It was like being in paradise. They just seemed very happy that they found it by accident as well. I went to New England and I explored this lighthouse that had a really, really rich history. But I don't want to say tour. I don't want to scare you. It's not like the pirates took it over or anything. But it was a really interesting, rich history. I took a walkabout in the Australian outback. That was really interesting. But I did it my way. It was more of a scientific walkabout. And granted, they always say that there's a ton of poisonous things that can kill you. But it's not like they're actively hunting you. I mean, granted, one or two of them were. I can't deny it, but Mostly, it's really not that way, and it's not like they're actively waiting for you to land to pounce. Not everything in Australia wants to kill you. I think that's a fair and safe assumption to make. But what I found is there was a really unusual reason why people don't go too far into the Australian outback. So I'll get into that in a later episode as well. We're going to be doing this about twice a month, so I mean it's a lot to cover, and it's a lot of ground to cover. I don't think we could do it any more frequently than that. There's just a lot of travel involved, and a lot of moving parts, a lot of things to put together, a lot of things to build, and to just really kind of figure out and analyze, because it's really, the journey is not just the journey, as you know. The journey is also bringing that journey back with you and having it become a part of you. And when that happens, then as a person, you just get fuller and fuller, and you just become more and more you, which is what we all want, don't we? Don't we all just want to be more us and more you, more me? And I think that leads us all to more enriching lives, I would think. But I'm not really a philosopher, I have to say. I stick more to science and exploring, but I have to say, philosophy can kind of creep in there, absolutely. A lot of the great Greek philosophers had a very strong knowledge of science. Socrates and Aristotle, they swung both ways. They really understood both things. They went back and forth all the time from science and philosophy, and they enjoyed both, really, to equal measure, and they realized that they complemented each other. I mean, really, if you combine everything, science, exploring, and philosophy, I think then, the sum is, of course, greater than its parts. I mean, we'll be focusing more on the science and the exploring, but I gotta tell you, the philosophy is going to creep in there, here and there. It's not, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Think of it as like an after-dinner mint, and like, oh, sure, the meal was great, but you know what would really top it off? That delicious chocolatey mint at the end of the dinner. It's in that weird silvery packaging. You can never really see it when you first go to the restaurant, but it's always there when you come out. It's almost like they hide it until you're done, because if you had it before, I think it would ruin your meal. I really do. But getting it on the way out, I'll tell you, it's almost like getting your hand stamped at Disneyland. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, you've enjoyed the meal, you're probably going to want to come back if you enjoyed it that much, but this is really going to really top it off. This is really going to, make the evening complete. You had this delicious meal, maybe a glass of wine, but that chocolatey, minty flavor that sometimes it gets right into as you're eating it clears your sinuses when if it's a really strong and powerful mint. The better restaurants have more powerful mints. I think I'm sure that's pretty obvious. The more expensive, they spend a little more on the mints, and they often get them imported from Mongolia, which is sometimes where the best mints come from. But I think that's what I'm talking about. Like, philosophy is the chocolate mint to your exploring scientific dinner. So I think when we combine all of those things together, we're going to have something truly extraordinary. I want to talk to you more about what I have here actually in the lab. I know we kind of talked about it, but let me talk about it a little bit more. Like, we've got the regular things like the flasks, the Bunsen burners, the electron microscopes. It's all here. Those are the obvious things, of course, but I've been doing this for a while, so I also have a particle accelerator, and I know you're thinking, well, particle accelerator, how could you even fit that into your lab? Again, there's a lot of PR on particle accelerators. They don't really have to be as big as they say with the super colliders. They're also called atom smashers, which is also kind of exciting. Basically, a particle accelerator is it's a machine that uses electromagnetic fields to propel charged particles to very high speeds and energies. It contains them in well-defined beams. They're basically used in research and for particle physics, of course, and of course the biggest one is the Large Hadron Collider near Geneva, Switzerland. It's operated by, there's always a little discrepancy on how it's pronounced, CERN or CERN or, CERN. I've heard it both ways, but it doesn't really concern me. So I think it's one of those things that it kind of depends on what you want it to do. Beams of higher energy particles are useful for fundamental and applied research in the sciences, and also in many technical industrial fields unrelated to fundamental research. And, some of this I'm just looking at from Wikipedia, and, I gotta say they get it mostly right, for sure. It says there's only about 1% of research machines with energies above 1 GeV, while about 44% are from radiotherapy, 41% are for ion implantation, if that's what they say, and 9% for industrial processing research, and 4% for biomedical and other low-energy research. But yeah, again, here's, this is the forward-facing information. Like I said, there's a lot of other things that the particle accelerators are being used for that's kind of not on the map right now. Things like shadow cloning, and there's a new version of making carbonated water using particle accelerators that's supposed to be absolutely fantastic. Like it's like no soda you've ever tasted. So I don't know. I've got some colleagues working on those things, so I can't say I'm completely fluent in the processes of that specific discipline of particle acceleration. So, it's high energy physics. It's a lot of stuff, and I have my particle accelerator. I use it for some different things. We'll get into that a bit later, but honestly, I just needed it to kind of help me with exploring. And, how would a particle accelerator help you explore? Well, I think that's going to be another episode, but think of if you go fast and fast and fast enough in a smaller amount of space, you can actually make things smaller. So that'll be kind of a hint as to one of the journeys will be going using the particle accelerator or atom smasher. I guess that's a little more sexier. I don't know why they would, but a super collider, I guess. But, I gotta tell you, I like particle accelerator. It just makes it sound like something small is going really fast, and I just, I kind of like that. I like that because, something small always gets underestimated. And the faster it goes, the more it can prove people wrong. So I really like particle accelerator. I think atom smasher is a little too militant, and I don't think it really gives the right idea of what a particle accelerator can do. That's kind of where we're at as far as what the lab is looking like and what we're going to be doing. I mean, I've got a couple experiments going on right now that may or may not directly relate to where we'll be going in future episodes. But like I said, we've got the air engine because we're on track to replace the internal combustion engine. I think that's going to happen. First I called it the oxygen engine, but, I kind of like air engine better. It just sounds, well, I hate to use the word sexier. I can kind of see why people use that word now. And I talked about how it's not going to really work in space. So we need more of a light engine. I mean, light sails are great for space. And but what we really need is kind of like a Tesla version of a light sail. If light can bend, can it be bottled and then used as rocket fuel? We're going to find out a little later. The other thing that I'm working on is I do like working with nanoprobes sometimes, and I finally figured out a way to have them make toast, so I never have to use the toaster again. I can just leave my bread out on the counter for the same amount of time, and then I'll have toast. So instead of putting it in the toaster, I can leave it on my plate, cover it in nanoprobes, wait for the same amount of time, and then I have toast. And then I can just eat toast because I've also programmed the nanoprobes to self-destruct after the toast is slightly golden brown. And then, so I don't want to eat a bunch of dead nanoprobes either. They, they disintegrate. I make sure they leave the toast before they self-destruct. So basically, I just need to wash the plate after when I'm done with my nanoprobe toast. Anyway, I think that just about covers it. Now, I know this is the first episode, but look, I gotta mention this at some point because it's there is a Patreon. It's the White Cat Explorers Club. Science and exploring is expensive, and I want you to join the White Cat Adventurers Club because you're going to get something really special. You're going to get a soundscape of every episode. There's different levels and tiers, but I think one of the things that's really cool, I like that word cool still. You'll get what's called a soundinscape. It's just soundscape of every episode. So think of it as like a blank adventure canvas for your ears and minds. So you'll get this episode that'll be for free out into the science world. But this episode, you'll get a version of the story without the story. You'll get added music, you'll get sound effects, you'll get more of the ambient noise that are recorded on every location. But you won't hear my narration. So you can create your own adventure story in your mind and a lot of people use that to help them drift off to sleep. That doesn't offend me in the least. I mean, I want you to be comfortable. I want, these journeys to help you. So if it helps you fall asleep, even without my narration, that's fantastic. I really think that's great. Thank you so much for listening. And I want to thank you for taking this first journey with me, even though we really didn't go very far. We stayed in the lab today, but that's okay. I mean, I think we got to know each other a little bit, and now you kind of have an idea of what to expect. So thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next journey.
The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood was created, written, and performed by Chris Mancini and produced by White Cat Entertainment. It is a work of fiction. Maybe. Music and sound design by Ron Tansky at rontanskymusic.com. For more info and merchandise, go to whitecatentertainment.com.